There we go. Where's Stacy? Oh. Are you getting libated, Stacy? So apparently, the fertility of Chautauqua is not only in getting people to tell us their story front, but I was just informed this is a great icebreaker for people who don't know each other. You say, so if you had to do that, what would you talk on?
See? We already figured it out. We've got one set up.
All right,
We're fixing necklines. And
both of you together?
No, I don't know anything about necklines. Right, yeah.
Very racy. All right. We need a little bit more action in this thing. That's great. You guys got to go?
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. You understand?
It's all good.
Well, if you guys had to be here for one of two talks, I feel like the dog and pet talk was a good one. Well, I just mean because you're huge dog people.
We're huge dog people, but this one sounds good.
It'll be online. It'll be online.
Well, that's true. Yeah, I got you.
Okay, people, get your food, get back to your seats. The lights are dimming. You're not nervous.
You guys taking off?
Well, we have two emergencies.
Oh no, what's going on?
One thing.
Oh.
The mother and kids.
Oh no.
And
Sounds okay. All good.
That's how we're going this year.
It's all good. You know what? Come up to Virginia tomorrow and give you the one-on-one.
Private, sure. See you guys. Thanks so much for coming.
Oh, good. Okay, go ahead and give
All right, people, get back to your seats. Quit talking. No more socializing. There's a presentation.
Go ahead and give me a
I was thinking about that because I was thinking, you know, what can we go today? And then I was like, it just sounded like I'm giving a research talk. I don't know, the people want to hear that.
So, I have to thank Sam. I submitted my title first, and Sam told me, "Stacey, that's a fine title. This was a scientific research paper, but this is not a good title." She's like, "What do you think? What do you think I should call it?" I've given him the little encapsulated version. He's like,
Hey, Buster.
Kings, Killers, and Cowboys.
Buster. Hey.
Hiding in the ones and zeros. So I was like, let's go with that. So that's my talk. And
It wasn't, but it is now.
It is now, yeah. So this is my deep dive into my family tree. So is there anybody here? Oh, and I'm Stacy Valentine Murphy. So is there anybody here that at any point in your life has kind of been interested in your family tree or genealogy or Ancestry.com? So go ahead and hit the next slide. So for me, that journey started when I was in high school. I was in high school in the late 80s in Northern Virginia, and I was given an assignment by a teacher to go and interview a relative, write out a pedigree chart, and kind of figure out what you can about your family tree, and kind of come up with some stories or whatever you can find out and put it in a presentation. And so this is my actual presentation.
You still have it from
I have
1987?
it. It is like one of the things I've always saved. So this is the notebook that I have.
Fancy.
Did you scribble on it?
Yeah, that's my my husband actually said to me, he's like, "What is that?" I was like, "This is my artistic crayon."
Oh, your
of, like,
tree.
it is
That's
the
your
tree. I was
tree.
like, it is art of like illusion of a tree. This is before you could do things on a computer where you could put a watermark or background. Like that was my little like fancy graphics in 10th grade.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, you went too far.
No,
Okay, so
I
go back.
didn't mean to do it. It happened.
I know.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, so I started by talking to my dad. My dad is one of my favorite people on the planet. Like, he was super excited to share about his family history. And he put me in touch with Uncle Roger, and I called Uncle Roger, who's in New Hampshire, and he mailed me some stuff, like mimeograph copies of the purple thing, and mailed it to me to put in my project. And then I lived in Northern Virginia, so I could take the metro into DC, and I went to the National Archives, and you got to get on the microfiche.
Yeah.
Remember microfiche?
Yeah.
And looked up like, oh, next slide, just one click. So, and looked up kind of birth certificates, marriage certificates.
Were
One
you
more
their
click.
favorite
One
student
more
who
click.
ever went to that damn high school? I mean, God.
Sometimes I like get into something and then I go down the rabbit hole, and I think one more click. You
I did it.
You did. Oh, there it is. Okay, there it is. Okay. So so with birth certificates, usually you can link to the next generation because they'll list the parents. Marriage certificates kind of links in some more people. A death certificate will often let you know kind of like certain dates, fill in birth dates and death dates. And then sometimes you can find newspaper articles, will documents from courthouses. This is a military record that was submitted for an application for a headstone marker, which has some information on it. And then the real kind of like amazing thing is basically kind of attic book finds out of an attic, like if there's actual real physical documents or artifacts that people can show you. And then another thing that I've used a lot are written family histories. This is a book from someone in my family history named John Doddridge. He was on the frontier in the late 1700s. His son in 1833, reflecting back on his growing up on the frontier, wrote a book about all his relatives. It was published 3 times. The first time it was published in 1833. There was a second publishing, and the last and final publishing was in 1912. And because of the internet, I found this book on the internet as a rare book, and it's just a rich source of information. So there's all kinds of information source that goes into it. But in high school, I was kind of in the microfiche, like birth certificate, death certificate. So, okay, next slide. So this is kind of this is the actual typed report that I had of all the people that I found.
You typed
That's
that
on the
up?
chart. Yeah, this is like onion skin typing from the 80s.
Oh, a typewriter, yeah.
It's in the book. Yeah, and notice all the typo. Was that good at typing? Yes.
She listened city directories, and then I remember
Yes.
from long ago of people doing this where you had, like you had to go do it. You didn't have the internet or anything like that.
Yes.
And I remember people saying that city directories were an amazing resource because they kept so many records of people in
Yes.
cities and neighborhoods. Did you ever see any of those?
Yes. So I've looked at lots of city directories. So in my generation, we call them the phone book, right? None of my kids know what a phone book is, but there used to be a phone book, and you could look people up in the white pages or the yellow pages. Before there was a phone book, they had city directories. And city directories would list businesses, and they would list people by streets. And oftentimes, people didn't have house numbers. It would just be like your name, what street you're on, and everybody knew everybody. But there's a ton of information and those sources. And census data is also really good. And different censuses will ask different questions at different times. And whatever year you're looking at the census, it's very telling kind of what the
Zeitgeist was.
what the issues were of the country, like whether they ask about education, like were you literate, were you able to speak English, and then you get into like what country were you born in, what country was your mother born in, and where you can see where immigration and who's kind of a real American and who's kind of the new wave generation, not really real American. So you kind of can like tell these things, and so it's interesting when you hear on the news debates about questions, the way questions are asked on the census. It's actually pretty important, and it's a big reflection of what our values are. So I was pretty proud of this. With my work at the National Archives, I was able to add on a couple people to what my dad had known, and I had 35 people on my dad's family tree, and going back for 7 generations to, this is 5 great-grandparents, and back to the mid-1700s. And at this point, like, I was hooked. Like, I had turned in the assignment, but a couple times I went back to the National Archives just because I really like to nerd out on this. So you can do next slide. So, so why? Why would I turn in the assignment? Why? Because, one, I'm really a history nerd. I love history. I love stories about time and place. On a Friday night, there's nothing better for me than to put on a good documentary. Huge Ken Burns fan. I like PBS, Find Your Roots. Like, you know, if my husband asks me what do I want to watch, it's always like PBS, Ken Burns. Like, I'll rewatch it. He's like, can we just watch a rom-com? I'm like, why? Like, history's so cool. So, and then my dad's family had a cool story to it that was really captivating. So everyone in my dad's family tree kind of came to this one geographic location, and I call it the middle finger of West Virginia. So,
Now I see it.
basically, just west of Pittsburgh, where Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia meet. And everyone in his family kind of can trace their roots back to pre-colonial days or pre-American Revolution. They all got land grants from either the Commonwealth of Virginia at the time under British rule, or from early kind of American land grants that were given out. And all these people got land basically on the frontier. So this is how we know the map today. In the 1770s, Pennsylvania and Virginia would have ended at the mountains. So West Virginia doesn't exist until after the Civil War. Pennsylvania as a colony stops here as you get to the mountains. So Pittsburgh is in kind of no man's land. And then this dividing line between Virginia and West Virginia, that would be kind of Shenandoah Valley, Blue Ridge Mountains, and Virginia ends there. And this orange line here, this is the Ohio River. Anything west of the Ohio River by treaty would have been Indian territory. There's a whole nother talk on all levels of messed upness with that, but in theory that would be Indians. So you have in between the mountain range and in between the Ohio River, this would have been the frontier, and that's where all lines of my dad's family intersect there. But not only that, just this small little like 30-mile area. So it's blown up here. So I put stars where some of the original homesteads were, and I was able to find a surprising amount of information on these people. So
Your people are from a place called Mingo Junction. That's gold. That's beautiful.
Mingo Junction will come into the story
Really?
later. Yes,
Oh.
that is actually a really important site. So, okay, next slide, please. So I'm just going to give you a quick run through on some of these. So this is John Doddridge, whose son wrote this book, and it kind of reads. This is a great read. I love it. It's a little bit like Little House on the Prairie, but just 100 years before Little House on the Prairie. And they describe what life would have been like on the frontier. This is an actual photograph from 1911 of the Doddridge's original log cabin. The original log cabin would have been this structure here. They added a second floor onto it, and they added this structure onto it. This structure no longer exists. It was demolished not long after this picture was taken, but it would have been, the original cabin would have been built in like the 1790s. So, okay, next slide. Just real quick. Okay, this is fast forwarding to we're at Freeman's Landing, which is outside of New Cumberland, West Virginia. Freeman's Landing, this is about 1850. This was a sketch that was done by a person who made a book of sketches of what was happening on the Ohio River as you travel down the Ohio River. So this is James L. Freeman's property. He had 500 acres. The land was originally acquired by his father, Thomas Freeman, and they gave away the land. It was kind of with a catch. Like they would give you 400 or 500 acres, but you had to occupy the land. You had to bring people with you. you had to build structures, you had to clear the land, and you had to produce farming or some sort of like economic means by it in order to get full ownership of the land, but usually within a 5-year period. And so Thomas Freeman did that in the 1780s, 1790s, and then this is in 1850 where you can see that it's a pretty established farm, pretty substantial house. Clearly, after 60 years, they'd established themselves on the Ohio River. And this would have been about 40 years after Lewis and Clark would have drifted right by this house on the banks of the Ohio. So next slide, I'll show you how Thomas Freeman made his money. So when James and Thomas Freeman settled the land, they realized pretty quickly that there was a large deposits of clay on the land. It just so happened that at that time the U.S. Geological Society had put out a pretty hefty reward looking for something called fire clay. Fire clay is a very specific type of clay that has a high burn point. So they noticed that there's large deposits of clay on this land. It was not good for farming, but with the clay, fire clay is clay that has a lot of silica in it, and it burns at a really high temperature, like 3,000 degrees, and it doesn't break down. So they use fire clay to build bricks that they line the smelting pots for the manufacture of steel. So they're about 30 miles outside of Pittsburgh by barge on the Ohio River. So it was a fantastic opportunity. It was a fantastic resource. So they made their profits by mining fire clay, manufacturing fire bricks on the banks of the Ohio, and shipping it upriver to Pittsburgh to line the smelting pots for the Industrial Revolution. So in addition to, they had actually 3 factories that they built on the river. One was for making fire clay or fire bricks. The other was for brick pavers. Some of these brick pavers are very hard, got shipped off to Paris and were used to line like sidewalks in Paris. And then the other use of the fire clay was they used it to make giant sewer pipes. It was about this time that major cities like New York City, Philadelphia, Boston were trying to install sewer systems underneath an established system. So they'd manufacture these kind of like 6 feet, 8 feet high sewer pipes, and they'd get shipped up to the industrial center. So, okay, next slide. So fast forward to 1900, those factories are gone and they've modernized. And essentially at this point they're just doing fire clay. And by this time train lines have come in along the Ohio River. And so a lot of this fire clay brick is being exported to Pittsburgh via train lines. And next slide, please. So at this point, the family, Nathaniel Wallace Ballantyne marries Virginia Freeman. And so the Ballantynes and Freemans are now kind of together, and you can click it. So, and this is my great-grandfather. So he was a good businessman, nice guy. I never got to meet him, of course, but my dad said he was a really good grandfather. And he had postcards that he would market to these different boundaries, advertising kind of the size of fire brick products they had. Scientific American had an article about the sewer pipes and the whole process of trying to install sewer pipes in our major metropolitan areas. And the whole time that I was in high school, if you went to the Smithsonian, you went to the Red Castle, Museum of Science and Industry, in the basement of Science and Industry, they had Nathaniel Wallace Ballantyne was recognized, and they had one of those sewer pipes in the basement with the family name. So that was always kind of cool to be this. So, okay, so
During field trips, you'd be like, hey, let's go to the basement.
yeah, no one wanted to go
What were we
to
finding
Science
out here?
Science Industry. No one ever voted for that. So, okay, so then we're gonna fast forward to Ancestry.com becomes a thing. So anybody here who's been on Ancestry.com? Okay, so you know about the little green leaf and all this stuff. So I get onto Ancestry.com in the mid-2000s, and here's kind of my dad's whole like family that I had, and they're all there. And because all these other people are kind of entering in their information, it's this collective of just tons of databases being added together. So all these municipal databases and county courthouse records and high school yearbooks being put in and newspaper articles. So all this merges, and it's just a massive amount of data. And so one of the things that happens is, from the work I've done, all of a sudden you get popped up and you'll get a thread of that goes kind of in the Wayback Machine. You're like, oh, this is cool, and you kind of follow the little leaves, and it'll tell you like, oh, we think you have a potential here or whatever. So one click, please. So I did that, and then so here we go, and I saw James Craig, and then I couldn't fit this all on one slide, and so here's James Craig, who was born in 1715. And then all of a sudden, boo, 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 it starts populating like, oh yeah, we know who. And then he came from James, Earl of Stewart, and the first Baron of Castle. And I was like, whoa, okay, what's going on here? Like, it's just popping up all over the place. So it was about this time that I started realizing, okay, I have a problem with the family tree now because it doesn't fit in one little
8 by 11.
Yeah, I can't just like type up one sheet like, here you go. So like I'd be asked at like family reunions, or there'd be a wedding or something, like, Stacy, why don't you tell us about your family history research? I'd be like, oh, I don't know how to do that. Like it's too much. So next slide, please. So Ancestry.com kind of created this data problem for me, where it was a thing of numbers. So, obviously, like, we all have 2 biological parents. When you come to grandparents, there's 4. Everyone here, biologically, you have 8 grandparents, 16 great-grandparents, and you can see what's going on. We have a doubling effect here. And so by the time you get to, like, 13 generations removed, where you're 10 great-grandparents, you're talking about over 4,000 individuals. Or up here, if you go 25 generations back, you're talking about 16 million individuals. So if you're like me, where I come from predominantly United Kingdom is my ancestry. I have a little spice thrown in with Germany,
Crazy.
Netherlands. That's the flavor. But like, if you go back to like, 1200 AD, there aren't 16 million people in Great Britain. So logically, it means that my family tree that is spread out like this, like there's some of this. There's some
Bottlenecking was there, Stacy? Explain a lot.
It's
West Virginia.
the other thing I want to point out on this side is like, so it's kind of cool, like, if your great grandparent is super famous, it's kind of cool. You share about 12% DNA with that individual. Once you get way down here to like, your 5 great-grandparent, you're talking less than 1% of kind of shared. So don't get too excited. I don't want to get too jealous of what I'm going to share with you. But just perspective. But it's just fun. It's fun. And okay, next slide.
That'll be a good thing. Right?
So I'm going to take you on a quick hop, skip, and a jump to my most distant, direct relative that I can link, like birth, death, parent, like I know the lineage back. So let's skip over a lot here. So that's me, born in 1971. There's my dad, Daniel Ballantyne. Lucy Brown Ballantyne is the wife of the very dapper businessman I already introduced you to. She was born in 1880. I'm gonna skip way down here to my 7th great-grandfather, that's 9 generations removed from me, James Craig from Northern Ireland. And he was born in 1715, died in 1791. in Augusta, Virginia. So James Craig is kind of cool for a couple reasons. One, he was the first immigrant on this line, came before the American Revolution from Northern Ireland, and died in Augusta County, Virginia, which is way into the frontier past the Lewis Mountains. And so you think, oh cool, you're Irish, Northern Irish then. But hold on, so next slide. So from there, I was able to go back, and turns out that James Craig, Janet Stewart, and her father, Archibald Stewart, all came over together at the same time in the early 1700s from Northern Ireland. And if you look here, they came from Billentoy Castle. So it's like, what? Billentoy Castle? Like, what is that? So Billentoy Castle does not exist anymore.
Oh.
It is in Northern Ireland. There's just a little like ruined wall there, and there's nothing in the town. It's like fishing village, desolated Northern Irish country town. But they did 10 years ago. They filmed a television show there.
Highlander. No, wait. What's the one you like?
Game of Thrones.
Oh no.
Second season Game of Thrones got filmed there. So, which I was like, yes, I'll take it. I'll take that for the win. So I was like, well, that's kind of cool. They're in Billentoy Castle, and so once you get into kind of castle stuff, like the British, they keep good records of this stuff, and so all of a sudden we're in Northern Ireland for 6 generations, and then you come down to, here's the real answer, they came over from Scotland.
Yeah,
So that's a whole other history thing where England essentially took people from Scotland who were loyal to the crown, and to keep the pesky Irish in line, they would give some of the like lesser sons, like, we'll give you this plot of land, you can build a little castle there, and to kind of keep the Irish in.
So it was a Protestant line?
Yes. Presbyterians. Yes. So not.
There's where the troubles begin. It's your
Yes.
people.
Stewarts.
You're in trouble.
Yes.
We're on the island of
Yes. So.
Chris, you can have words with her later.
I know.
We'll talk.
We'll talk. Yeah.
So, okay. So next slide. Okay, and so I'm going to skip over this. So we have a lot of like.
Are you at
sheriff
like one
abuse.
drop of blood in your entire body at this point? You may have
It's
come.
really thin.
Okay,
It is
yeah,
really thin.
okay.
But it's like the position is the sheriff of Butte. Like, so this is not like the sheriff. And I looked this up. Like, so if you're talking like in the 1300s, the sheriff is kind of like being like Speaker of the House. Like, these are like the Kevin McCartys. Like it is not a very.
Maybe a Nancy Pelosi.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
I can
fair.
only hope.
Yeah.
But like, so this pretty like far down on the chain of people that are hanging out in the castle, but they were the sheriff of Butte, and on the Isle of Butte, they all lived at Rothsay Castle, which is still there today, and you can visit it. And I had a whole trip planned, and then COVID happened,
Oh.
and that all got squashed. But someday. So.
And can you just walk in at this point and be like, "That's my chair. Stacey Valentine.
I've got the sheriff
Let me
badge."
show you the docs."
I'll let you know.
Okay.
I'll let you know. I'm hoping. I don't think it works that way.
They love Americans.
Yeah. So, okay. So if you notice, like, here's where I get into the problem. I'm like, this is not my favorite way to tell my family history story, because it kind of starts being a little bit reminiscent of like Book of Genesis, like, and Archibald begot Ninian, and Ninian begot Janus. So that's like, so it's not so interesting. But if you look at the very line, this story gets a little bit interesting.
King of Scotland.
Yes. So
Really?
next slide. This is not up here. This is the next slide. So this is the furthest back I could get it. Is my 20x great grandmother, 22 generations removed, was Marjorie Bruce. She's born in 1296. She's the firstborn of the first king of Scotland. Princess Marjorie was hidden and imprisoned in a convent during her teenage years. She was freed in exchange for captives from the Battle of Bannock, which is a big Scottish independence battle. The princess married Walter Stewart, giving rise to the House of Stuart, which is what all those people in the Isle of Bute are. And at age 20, she's thrown from a horse while pregnant with the heir to the throne. Monks, they rush her to a monastery. The monks perform an emergency C-section on her, and preserving the life of Robert II, but Marjorie dies. And she still lies in a tomb in Paisley, Scotland, in an abbey. It's claimed that this is the first recorded C-section, which I kind of feel like, I don't buy that, because I feel like people figured this out, right? Like people who like dealt with like
The monks didn't come up with this on their own.
yeah, I feel like anybody who's like done a lot of fishing or something, or like worked with animals, like at some point you kind of figure this out, like, oh, we have a major head trauma, like there's a baby in there.
Let's get it out.
Yeah, I feel like it's not, you don't necessarily.
You know why it's called a cesarean section? Julius Caesar was delivered by cesarean section.
Oh,
So that was a bit
Okay.
before Marjorie.
there you go. So thank you. I was like, it was kind of some Scottish article where they were like, it was like, really?
Maybe
Guys?
the first one
This
is
is the first Scottish one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the only one that counts. It's Scottish.
Yeah. So, and then my 21 greats grandfather, 23 generations removed from me, and but direct line here, Robert the Bruce, first king of Scotland, respected warrior. He fought alongside William Wallace, Braveheart. Who saw Braveheart?
Yeah.
We're cousins!
Freedom! Yeah, woo! So that's kind of fun. So this is kind of my epiphany that it's not really about the data. You can really get lost in the ones and zeros. The fun part about this is the stories. Like, it's really story. And whether you're like, really, like, I don't know, like, maybe, I don't know.
Well, but you are, but it's like,
Kind of.
yeah.
What does it mean to you?
I will let you draw your own conclusions based on what you know of my personality as to whether or not you think.
Queen material. Queen material top
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
bottom. Stacey.
Lots of
Should we
potential.
bow?
We're Scottish. It's not that formal. So, okay.
We're lucky she's wearing pants. Okay, carry on.
Okay, next slide, please.
If the queen wears pants, everybody should.
Okay, so where's my little paper? So the next thing, if you will indulge me, so I feel like I've taken a lot of your time. Where am I on time?
You're doing fine. You're
Great.
right on time.
Am I on time?
Yeah,
Okay.
completely an alien.
So I do want to tell you. So let me tell you this. So what I ended up doing was I realized like it's not about the data. It's not about the ones and zeros. It's not about pedigree. It's about these stories. And I kept coming across these really amazing people that had done amazing things. And so it's like, okay, I spent too much time on Facebook. This was over COVID. I'm gonna just start typing up stories. And so I'd pick one person and I'd try to piece together their life and just like figure out what I could gain based on by where they were in time and place, looking up kind of what was going on in the history. And so this is my work in progress. I've got about 200 pages, about 30 bio sketches of people that I'm like, oh, these people are cool. Like, so somebody should, like, so that's like been my hobby, to an audience of no one. But if you'll let me, I'd love to read my favorite story from the 30
Please do.
sketches.
Please do.
Yes. I love that you've written up these stories. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, thanks. It's fun.
It gives it like personality, right? And meaning.
Yeah,
Who
yeah.
are these people?
Yeah, and I feel like, and the more I study it, the more it's like, oh, these people are cool. And even some of the less dramatic characters, like some of the females that were like on the frontier or something, you get a taste of what they're doing. And so just to try to figure out what they had to go through, or, losing babies, or, multiple husbands or something, trying to piece that all together. So, okay. So we're back to my picture here of the middle finger of West Virginia and back to the frontier. So notice my arrow to Mingo Junction. This will come into
Love
play, Sam.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm waiting.
So, okay, you can do next slide. So, I want to introduce you guys to William Cochrane. This is my 7 greats grandfather. William Cochrane was born in Scotland around 1730, and he arrived in the North American colonies in 1757. During that time of American history, the British government was giving away land for free, but there was a catch. Land was typically offered as payment for military service or for a commitment to defend a large area of land against some defined enemies, such as the French or indigenous groups.
Or other ne'er-do-wells.
Yeah. 30 French people in the audience. Okay, sorry.
Nicole Robert, you want to claim anything?
So, in addition, the land would have to be settled and developed, typically for at least 5 years. William acquired a large piece of property on the edge of the frontier between what is now Wellsburg and Wheeling, West Virginia. So here's here, Wellsburg and Wheeling. This is Wheeling down there. William Cochran Homestead included the areas known as Short Creek and West Liberty, which are on the map, along the banks of the Ohio River. Military records show that William swore allegiance to the Commonwealth of Virginia on October 4th, 1777. So he's not fighting. He says, "Screw you, King George.
No revolution.
I'm hanging out with the Americans." So he built a cabin with several other structures, and he raised animals, simple crops, to feed his growing family. Several books of family history recount the events of mid-September 1782, including a detailed account from the Bonnie Belmont book, written by J.S. Cochran, which I can give you the full reference to if you care. So J.S. Cochran was, it says, William's son, Robert Cochran, recounted the story around 1860 when he was in his late 90s to his grandson, R.H. Cochran. R.H. Cochran later published the story in a collection of frontier tales, and that's where this comes from. So William was, quote, noted for being the fastest runner in that part of the frontier. He was a good surveyor, and he had done some civil engineering. There was no better shot with a rifle. And in his pioneer life, he had become thoroughly conversant with the characteristics of Indian warfare. He was a good scout, and his fleetness of foot had saved him on more than once from capture while on perilous expeditions for the government forces, end quote. They're not my words. In 1782, there were several pioneer settlements between Wellsburg and Wheeling. These settlement communities included Fort Van Meter, Fort Shepherd, Short Creek, Fort Liberty, Fort Henry. The Ohio Territory across the Ohio River from the primitive forts was all considered Indian land. The settlers pushed further into these lands of the Ohio Valley and the Shenandoah Valley. Fighting became increasingly common between settlers and the local indigenous groups. The local indigenous groups would have been Iroquois, Delaware, and Mingo. So, although the decisive American victory at the Siege of Yorktown in October of 1781 is considered the last major battle of the American Revolution, smaller conflicts between Loyalists and Americans persisted within the colonies for many months. One of these last battles of the American Revolution to occur after the war happened in September of 1782. It was known as the Siege of Fort Henry. British forces had armed about 400 indigenous warriors from the Shawnee, Wyandot, Mingo, Seneca, Iroquois, and Delaware tribes. And then from September 11th to September 13th, 1782, a group of British-aligned Native Americans attacked the garrison at Fort Henry, which is in Wheeling. Okay. So, word of the surprise attack spread to the homesteads along the eastern side of the Ohio River. All the surrounding settler families fled their simple cabin homes for the safety of the reinforced forts in the area. After 2 days of quiet, the settlers began to wonder if it was safe to travel back to their homes. No one had heard from the occupants of Fort Henry, and the settlers were worried. Fearing that the troops at Fort Henry might have been massacred in the attack, two scouts, William Cochran, my seventh grade grandfather, and William Billy Boggs were sent out from the fort to ascertain. They were sent out from like Fort Liberty to ascertain the fate of everybody down in Wheeling. And I think due to records, I think Billy Boggs is a brother-in-law to William Cochran, but that's unclear by the records. So they head out on their journey, and shortly into their journey, William and Billy passed William Cochran's property, which had been pillaged. The horses had been stolen and driven off, and a short distance past Cochran's property at Short Creek, the two scouts came upon a band of 40 Iroquois warriors who had been involved in the attack of Fort Henry. Gunfire broke out. Cochrans and Boggs emptied their guns and started to run. Indians attempted to surround them, but Cochran and Boggs were too swift and soon outpaced the fastest Indians in the group. Outnumbered and outgunned, Cochran and Boggs split up in an attempt to divide their pursuers. Cochran was out of range of their guns, but made a fatal miscalculation. Rather than keeping along the twisted lower path that followed Short Creek, he attempted to climb a very steep projecting point overlooking the creek. As Cochran was trudging up the steep hills, the Iroquois were coming down the other side, rapidly closing the distance. A man known as Dalway Jim, who was said to be half Indian and half Ulster Scot, dropped to one knee and took aim at the figure on the hill. Quote, but one shot of all those fired, he hit and killed him instantly. They scalped him and left the body where it fell.
This is William Cochran?
William Cochran,
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Very lost.
So, next slide. So,
Oh, yeah.
Is that William or just a general
it
representation?
is a general
Okay,
representation.
fine.
So
All right, Seems like an important guy.
yeah, this is also like this did happen on the frontier, and then, as you might imagine, there's some like there's like the Fox News of the day would carry these stories in the newspaper and kind of try to like rile up kind of support and more funding for the frontier. So there are certain depictions and stories, and so there's all this has to be like a little bit of a. There's definitely this stuff was definitely politicized at the time, and so keep that in mind. Okay. So
What happened to Billy?
well, I'm glad you asked.
Oh.
So Billy Boggs was captured, and he was taken 16 miles north to 16 miles north of Wheeling, West Virginia, to Mingo Bottom, where the party crossed onto the Ohio side of the river. As the band of 40 Indians regrouped, one of the warriors slapped the prisoner in the face with the bloody scalp, at which point, quote, he knew what had been the fate of his companion. On the banks of the Ohio River, the Indians stripped Boggs and then formed two lines and made him run the gauntlet, beating him with sticks and switches as he passed. But in a surprise move, Billy Boggs pushed one of the Indians down, broke through the line, and jumped off the steep bank of the Ohio River. The Indians immediately ran for their guns and began to fire at the river. Billy had a reputation for being an excellent swimmer. His skill, along with the cover of darkness, allowed Boggs' heroic escape. Boggs traveled 16 miles through the night to Fort Henry, presumably without clothing. After
That's your own introduction, I guess.
it's a question. I can't ask anyone. After hearing of Boggs' adventure, a group was sent on horseback to the hill at Short Creek, where they discovered William's scalped remains and buried him where they found him, not far from his property at Short Creek. And next slide. So there's a memorial plaque for William Cochran at the Short Creek Methodist Cemetery in West Liberty, West Virginia. And there's this thing. So, and the plaque was erected in 1924, and there was like a family reunion.
Did you take this picture?
I did not,
Oh.
thanks to the web.
Internet.
So, and you know, I've got, those are 3 of my, I've got 27 more stories. So, you guys,
The night
you
is
got
young,
some too?
Stacy. The night is young.
Take a break and I can get it. No, but that's my talk. So you can hit the next slide.
Oh.
I can do that. So if you're into your family history, I would encourage you to pursue your hobby, write down the stories. It's really great stories. Yeah. So
There's no alliteration, Stacy.
Sam changed it to cowboys. I was like, there's no cowboys, they're frontiersmen. And he said it didn't sound good. So I had to correct that. And this is like my original, I think, I don't know what I told you the title was, but it was something like this. Like,
It was a bit shorter than that. It was a bit more fit.
recognizing that the joy of researching your family tree is not in mountains of data, but personal stories that intertwine your individual ancestry with historical events that shape their lives, comprised of significant accomplishments and tragic trials. And that was a little long-winded.
That was great. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
On Ancestry, I've seen it looks a lot like 23andMe. Did anyone else from your family who was doing their own separate, so maybe some distant that you didn't really know, but who contacted you through that?
Yes.
And then you were able to share stories or something?
Yes, I've had people that are like uber distant, like, I mean, we're like 7th cousins, but they're like, I'm trying to research Teresa Gamble, and in 1713, she was married to blah, blah, blah Valentine. What do you know about her? I'm like, but, you know, we just kind of share stories, and usually, you know, so that's super cool, so.
Two things, just
Yeah.
to comment. Like, two
Yeah.
things you said that were interesting to me. One
Yeah.
is, or that your sort of genealogy thing of like, when you get 24 generations back, it's like, it kind of helps explain why, like, everyone and their brother's like, well, you know, if you go back far enough, I'm related to like, I was
Yeah.
descended from the King of England. It's like,
Yeah.
yep, that'll happen. I mean, it's because,
Yeah.
you know, you've got 16 million grandparents back at that level, so one of them's going to be famous.
Yeah.
And, you know, Sarah, we have a statistician who's going to talk next time. Raise your
Yeah.
hand.
Yeah.
He might talk on this as an
Look out on
adjunct.
me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Mario's a biostatistician.
Yeah. So, does anybody watch the show Finding Your Roots with Skip Gates on PBS?
It's on my list.
I love that show. And they were doing John Waters, the director for
Yeah.
Baltimore, Hairspray and all that. And my mom's maiden name is Waters. And so I was just sitting there, and all her family's from Maryland. I'm like, yep, it's somewhere. And I'm just waiting. And then he got to like the American Revolution. He was talking about this guy. And I was like, yep, I know, that's it.
Oh, wow, that's a connection.
So I can connect. So then I traced out, it's like, me and John Waters are 6th cousins. So
Aw.
I don't think that's going to get me movie tickets. So,
What was
okay.
your gift for narrative?
I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
So, you know, I had an uncle who did a great deal of this thing
Yeah.
many years
Yeah.
ago. But he started probably in the 80s as well. And he was visiting churchyards in the Netherlands and things like this. How much easier is it today than the internet?
Oh, immensely. I mean, yeah, I hit a point where I had to stop because I would have had to go to these little courthouses in West Virginia. And, you know, so many of these courthouses, like, stuff has been lost to fire or just water damage or flooding or whatever. And so, we're just not organized. But Ancestry.com is really kind of tied in databases and just even like I think pretty much every high school yearbook from the last 100 years. I don't know who's sitting and scanning all this information in, but like all of a sudden I'm getting little green leaves of like from the 1920s from my great grandparents is their high school, you know, yearbook, and kind of find out that, you know, they were in the radio club or they wrote an article or it's kind of cool. So you just get a little snippet of a, so okay, one more quick thing that I'll show you. I don't have time to cover it. So in doing a lot of this research, I was talking to my dad. My dad was born in 1940, so he's 83 now. And my dad's a great guy. We used to talk politics all the time. And starting about 5 or 6 years ago, he just wasn't really able to keep up with that conversation. And my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 3 years ago. And so there's been this kind of slow decline. And But one of the things for the last several years where he's always happy to go to, and it's just fresh as could be, is if you get him talking about his family history or life growing up in the 40s and 50s in Pittsburgh and all this stuff. And he can tell you about that factory, and he can tell you everybody's name if you worked there, the foreman, what he was like, how the shop was organized. And so that's been pretty amazing. And so for a long time, that was what our conversations would be, is I'd be like, tell me about the family history. I'd just get them talking and then take notes. And then a year ago, last summer, so 15 months ago, my dad had said to my brother and I, hey, I really want to go visit New Cumberland, West Virginia. I want to visit where the old factory was. And my mom, as I said, like, there's nothing there. It's like, the town is nothing. There's no factory there. Why would you want to go? And my brother and I were so like, I'm in. Road trip, Dad. And so we're like, yeah, let's do it.
Get the Pringle.
So we planned a road trip with my dad, and he was pretty fragile, and my mom was really worried, and we're like, I've raised 5 kids. I can handle my dad. And she's like, don't leave him in the hotel room. He'll get confused. I got him, Mom. I got him. Promise I will return him in good shape. And so we took my dad on this Pittsburgh road trip, and he showed us all the things. And then I made this picture book for him that my dad has a copy of, and it's a merger of the old pictures from his youth and the new pictures of our trip. And my mom says he goes through it all the time, and he just talks about it like this. So that's cool. Application.
One thing that this just triggered a memory. Like, I was watching a show about a year ago. It was very interesting about like this family of African Americans, and this one guy had been very successful in tech, and he moved back to his small town in Virginia where his ancestors were from, and bought this nice big house. And they were surprised. They didn't think they would be sold to them. It's like, they don't sell nice houses to black people in the, this is modern day. And then they were able to do some genealogy and figure out that his ancestors had been enslaved just by chance on that same
That's nuts.
farm. Which,
That is
real
nuts.
nice. Oh, I mean, it is nice. But the weird thing was that I hadn't thought about this, but, for people of European ancestry, there are these records that go back, whatever. But for these folks who want to know their ancestry, who are, the children and the descendants of enslaved peoples, like, there's a big line, like about 1865, strangely enough. And before that, it's just like black female living on property, 3 kids. Is that my great-great-grandmother?
Absolutely.
Her name was Joyce, but there were 6 Joyces, whatever. And I it was interesting in this story, like, for people who have that yen to understand their ancestry, even only is their ancestry in this country, because they're never going to get ancestry back to Africa, but they're kind of stuck with 150 years.
It's true. It's
Which
true.
I never thought that, and then I was like, oh man.
It's why, I think, how census data was kept for slaves and stuff, it really is a form of genocide when you take away people's history or take away people's lineage, and that it really destroys, the identity of people. So, and it's been used systematically throughout, the ages to destroy populations of, Armenia or Rwanda or whatever, just destroying records. So, yeah. I don't know. And I often ask myself, why do I care? Like, what does it matter? Like, who? I don't know why. Like, it's. I find it interesting, and I find other people's. I'll watch any ancestry story. Like, I love it. I just love the storytelling. I love learning about places through that venue. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for staying, y'all. I know people need to get going home. Really appreciate coming out. Chris, we're confirmed. I think you're going to be one of our next speakers. So we don't, probably in January. We don't have a weekend yet, but we'll let you know soon so you can block it off on your calendar. And postpone your trip to Stad, come to Chautauqua first, then go skiing. And we need one more person to, I'll find somebody, but if anybody's feeling the yen, come talk to me because we need one more speaker.
It feels like you should have another statistician.
Yeah, I don't like the sounds of that one. We're trying to bring them in. We're trying to bring people. Get out of the way, I guess.
What's the probability of that being a good
Hope you all had a good night. Thank you so much for coming.